So in this video of Rounding 1 Introduction, we'll be going over what is meant by the term rounding numbers, why do we round numbers, and the different types of rounding that we use in maths today. So with rounding, being able to round numbers correctly is a really important skill and is used in many other topics. So not being able to master skill could stop you from getting full marks in answering many exam questions. So in this and the accompanying videos regarding rounding, we'll cover the following things. So we'll go over why do we round numbers, the types of rounding you can do, rounding to decimal places including the newly introduced truncating, how to use your calculator to fix rounding to decimal places on your calculator, and rounding to place value and significant figures, or what we call sig fig. So let's have a look at why do we round numbers. So we round numbers that are either long decimal numbers or multi-digit numbers so that they're not only easy to say but easy to write down, approximate and estimate. So if we look at the two examples, so if you follow the National Lottery, so an expected jackpot could be an exact value of 34,465,384 and 89 pence. Now, as you can appreciate, me reading that out is a bit of a mouthful. So what we might want to do is estimate this value, or round this value up to, let's say, 34 million. So what we've done there is we've approximated that value to make it easy for us to say, and also take up space as well. Now, another way of rounding is to use words like millions. So obviously in UK and in many other countries use slightly different sort of formats, is that we use what we call base 10. So we count in units, tens, hundreds, thousands, 10,000. It's all multiples of tens. So we can, rather than writing lots of zeros in numbers, we kind of abbreviate them using keywords like tens, like thousands, like hundreds, like millions, trillions, to make it easy for us to say, so you get some grasp of what we've done. And if we look at example 2, where let's say we're imagining that we measured a room and we wanted to carpet this room. So if we look at the actual measurements of the dimensions of that room, we're looking at 2.45 and 4.78. Now again, you probably want to overestimate in this one because you definitely don't want to end up with less carpet. So one thing you might want to say is that this is roughly. Now if you can see what I'm doing on screen, I've got like a squiggly equal sign, which basically means that I've rounded or approximated in some shape or form. So I might say that the sort of width of this room is 2.5 meters, or I might even go as far as saying it's 3 meters as rounding up. For the length of this room, I could approximate as being 4.8 meters, or I could even approximate as being 5 meters. And so there are different forms, and again, the main reason why we round numbers is to make it easier for us to say, easier to work with, because obviously in maths, the more digits you're using in a number, the more chance you are of making a mistake of going wrong. So although it's not going to be accurate, it's certainly going to make it easier to get a ballpark. And likewise, when you're actually doing any mathematical calculations, as you can see here, that when we're doing this calculation, you might want to estimate the answer. So rather than using 445.46, you might want to just use 445. You might just want to use 340. You might even go as far as only wanting to use 300. And again, for each of those, I've made it particular. And likewise for 97.73, I could just use 97. I could use 100, or I could use 90. And again, it's just a case of making it easy for us to work out. So if I don't have a calculator handy, I could easily use more simpler numbers than the numbers I've got to work out, and that will give me an approximation or an estimate as to working with what the answer should be. And again, that's a really important skill, and as I always go on, that to do well in maths is about 65% knowledge, 35% common sense, of you understanding what the answer should look like. And once you've established and understand what your answer should look like, it makes maths a lot easier and not so trusting on your calculator, because obviously the calculator is only as clever as the buttons you press. So when it comes to rounding, there are a couple of things that you need to be aware of. So the terms rounding up, rounding down are quite self-explanatory. So when rounding down is when you use a number that is smaller, rounding up is when you're using a number that's bigger. Now, one thing that you probably need to be aware of is the kind of misconceptions, the errors that people make when they use the word rounding down. So for example, if I had 3.4563, and let's say I want to round, and you were asked to round down to 1 decimal place. Now, a common error that people think is, oh, The first number after the first decimal place is 4, so then that becomes, and we're asked to round down, so we're going to round this down to 3.3. Now that is a complete utter mathematical disaster in terms of, well, not a complete disaster, probably kind of self-exaggerated there, but that's a big no-no, it's definitely wrong. So when it comes to rounding, what you've got to do, so if I had this number, just kind of not to kind of go into decimal places, is that this number, if we look at a scale and we're looking at to one decimal place, so we've got 3.3 and we've got 3. Let's have a look at, we've got 3.4 and we've got 3.5. Now this number is somewhere between these two. Now what I've got to decide is, if I round down, it's going to be 3.4, and if I round up, it's going to be 3.5. So you kind of need to know between what two scale numbers is the number actually going to be between. So rounding down is where you go for the smaller option, rounding up is when you go for the bigger option. Now in terms of mathematical words, which will be featured in our next videos on rounding, so we'll be going over rounding to place values, so to nearest 10, 100 and 1,000. Now even at secondary school you still get asked these questions, so don't automatically think that when you're rounding numbers it's going to be definitely decimal places or significant figures, which kind of segues into what I'm going to say next. So hopefully rounding to nearest 10, 100,000 is something that you're kind of already aware of. I'll do a video on rounding to decimal places and another video on significant figures, and something that's been slowly reintroduced to the syllabus is the word truncating. So again, if you are unsure, I'm going to go through each of these kind of types of mathematical roundings in the next videos.